Don't let this shabby hat mislead you. Underneath this hat is a top-notch business mind. This little black boy, Bernard, cleans shoes for a living. Nevertheless, pay attention. He sets up his stall in front of the bank on purpose so that all of his customers will be wealthy white people. He doesn't care about the little money he makes by shining shoes. He works slowly so he can listen in on what white people are saying about money while they wait for number 8. As soon as they left, the little boy would write it down in a notebook. All he wants is the valuable financial advice he got from them when he was young. He knows that becoming a banker is his lifelong dream. This is Texas in 1939, a time when racism hurts black people a lot. His father sadly tells him that his dream is impossible. But Bernard's eyes show that he is determined despite everything. 15 years later, when he was grown up, the boy moved to Los Angeles with his wife Eunice and their children. Since racism here isn't as bad as it is back home, he decides to start his business here. The family of 3 has to live in the old utility room of one of his relatives. Still, Bernard tells his wife that they will soon be moving out. He begins as a real estate agent and looks for houses for sale all over the city. Through careful observation, he finds that the black community in Los Angeles is too large. White people still have a lot of empty houses, but there is no market for black people to rent them. This is a great business opportunity for buying and renting out real estate. He sees a white-owned apartment with weeds on the front door, which shows that it's not in very good shape. Still, he is the only one who can see how the house's location next to the black area is a good thing. He goes to the owner and says, "You only rented out half the apartment, so why don't you sell it to me? I'll give you $30,000 now and another $5,000 when all the rooms are rented." Even though the owner likes his idea, he doesn't want to do risky business. Before leaving, Bernard says he understands. He suddenly looks at the owner's calendar, which shows that it is given by a local bank manager. So he thinks of something. He says goodbye to the owner and goes right to the bank, where he finds the manager who sent the calendar. Because she doesn't like black people, the manager's secretary won't introduce him to him. He waits for a few hours at the bank door, and when the manager comes out, he stops him right away. He says, "I know one of your best customers. The business I run will help him, and I hope you can give me a loan." But the bank manager rejects him without even thinking about it. That night, he gets a call from the owner. The owner asks him if he used his name to try to get a loan. He doesn't want to apologize, but he has to. The owner doesn't blame him, but he admires how sure he is that he will not give up until his goal is reached. He thinks of the bank manager, but the manager has already helped the widow and avoids Bernard again. Extremely upset, Bernard stands in the bank and looks around. The clean and orderly bank building has fangs all over it that are meant to be offensive. Simply because of the color of his skin. He is often laughed at when he goes to the bank. As Bernard thinks about this, he slowly comes up with a daring plan. There are 4 banks in one building, and all of them have closed doors for this black man. At this very moment, Bernard had a brilliant idea. "I will buy this building and see who of you dares to treat me unfairly again." So Bernard finds Joe, another black Los Angeles real estate developer, and tells him about his plans. At first, Joe thinks he is crazy because the landowner decides to back the loan for him. So he gets the first loan of his life from the bank and buys the property. The old lady, who was left speechless, went home in a rage, and the police soon arrived. They tell Bernard that an old lady called the police and then ask him if he pretended to be the owner and argued with her. Unexpectedly, Bernard pulls out a copy of the real estate certificate. It turns out that he has seen trouble coming, so he is prepared. When the police found out that the house really belonged to him, they got angry and left. That night, Bernard goes back to his apartment building. When the old lady at the door sees him, she immediately tells him to leave because it's not time for renovations. Bernard still answers calmly, "I'm no longer a worker doing repairs. I'm the owner now." The old lady is dumbfounded, and a few days later she moves out in a huff because she doesn't want to live in the same building as black people. As soon as the old lady leaves, Bernard rents out her house to a black lady. As he said, the black tenant market is huge. The building is quickly rented out, and Bernard makes the agreed-upon follow-up payment to the former owner. The former owner has a lot of respect for Bernard and wants to go into business with him. Bernard chooses the house and figures out how much money he will make from it. The old owner negotiates the deal and signs the contract with him in front. When someone discriminates against him unfairly, he won't fight back because then he'd be playing by other people's rules. He wants to make his own decisions. His main goals are to be rational, efficient, and make the most money possible. But life doesn't always go smoothly, and problems can pop up at any time. The former owner who works with Bernard is old and frail, and he dies suddenly. A few years later, his wife gets his share of the company as an inheritance. This woman is very prejudiced against black people and doesn't want to work with Bernard. She rudely offers to buy Bernard's shares at a very low price, and if he doesn't agree, she will sue him. In that period, when whites and blacks go to court, who do you think the judge would side with? Bernard isn't willing to be treated so unfairly, so he decides to go to court. But he had to find someone to testify about his good relationship with the old owner. Price for the building is very high and no black person has ever bought land in La Downtown. But after talking about it for a while, Joe realizes that Bernard is not a man with delusions, but a thoughtful rationalist. Why does he want to buy that building? Because as long as he owns the building, the bank inside it will serve him. They wouldn't dare refuse to give him a loan. They will also tell him what the real estate trend is, which will help his real estate business run more smoothly. Joe is shocked by his idea, but after thinking about it, he thinks it will work. Even though he is very rich, white people are always bothering him. If he can step on white bankers on white land, he will be able to make more money. Still, they can't deal with white people directly, so they need a white person to act as a middleman. In this mind, Bernard already has an idea for Matt, who has been helping him with renovations. This person is trustworthy. He is also very ambitious, but he lacks experience. So, Bernard and Joe set out to train Matt in all areas. They taught him to golf, good manners, thinking, and real estate. Matt lives up to people's expectations and learns golf quickly. He can calculate real estate values while playing golf, just like a young, promising entrepreneur at a golf club. Matt talks to the owner of the bank building. Joe has set up this meeting as well. The conversation goes smoothly. Matt will have the chance to buy the building, and the rest will be worked out. Matt, on the other hand, doesn't know how to do it. Don't panic. Before the negotiation, Bernard helps Matt with all the preparations. First, he counts how many lights are on in the building after dark. Then, he figures out the vacancy rate of the building. Finally, he figures out the building's estimated value by adding up its annual building and operating costs. Bernard writes down any numbers that might be involved and tells Matt to remember these numbers before meeting with the owner. So, no matter how the big boss lies about his property, Matt is always one step ahead and gives out the exact number, which shocks the big boss. The accountant standing next to him is also dumbfounded. They all think that they've met a math genius and have no chance of fooling him. In the end, Bernard gets the building, which was originally priced at more than $2.4 million, for just $1.56 million. From then on, whenever Bernard goes into or out of the building, the president of every bank will come to shake his hand. The little manager who made things hard for him in the past is shocked. With the help of the banking industry, Bernard and Joe's real estate careers grow quickly. They break the strict zoning rules that keep blacks and whites separated in Los Angeles. Soon after, many young and promising black people moved into white neighborhoods. The vice president even met with them. Several years later, in 1963, Bernard brings his family back to Texas to see his father, Britton. After dinner, Britton tells Bernard that he's proud of what he's accomplished. The next day, Bernard walks his son around town. Before they know it, they are in front of the bank where Bernard used to shine shoes for a living. At that time, Texas was the most racist place in all of the United States. They meet a young boy who shines shoes, just like Bernard used to do when he was young. To Bernard's surprise, the boy will only work on white people's shoes. This small event affects Bernard and reminds him that he has a responsibility to his fellow man. He secretly decides that he must change his mind things are and help the black people in his hometown get better housing. The next day, Bernard goes to see Joe and tells him they should buy the Mainland Bank in Texas. Because racism is so bad in Texas, Joe thinks Bernard is crazy for even thinking about doing it. But Bernard manages to show good reasons to buy the product. In the end, Joe agrees to help Bernard out. Again, they get Matt to be their front man. They talk about the deal's numbers with the bank's owners, Robert Florence Sr. and Jr. Despite Florence Jr.'s doubts, Sr. sells the bank to Matt and his partners. After buying the Mainland Bank, Bernard goes to work and starts helping African Americans in town get approved for loans. It seems like Bernard's goal is to help his fellow men get a fair chance at housing and even money-making opportunities. Things go well for a while, but then Florence Jr. starts to look into the loans that their bank approves. One day, Florence follows Matt and ends up with Bernard and Joe. He talks to them about the loans they approved and threatens to send a letter from the U.S. Treasury Department. He says that the department will check on how the bank is doing in 1 month. As Florence Jr. walks away, the guys talk about what to do next. In the meantime, Matt has an idea. He suggests that they buy another bank and move the problem loans from the mainland to that bank. They talk about buying Marlon Moore's bank, and Bernard says the biggest problem is keeping track of how the bank works. In response, Matt suggests that he should be allowed to run the new bank. Bernard says he doesn't like the idea, but in the end, he agrees to let Eunice keep an eye on Matt. In the end, Matt gets to run his bank just the way he wanted. The next day, Matt meets with an attorney and starts signing loan contracts on his signal. Later, Matt gets a call from Florence Jr. about some customers who want to take all of their money out of the mainland. To make matters worse, a federal bank examiner comes to Marlon to help Matt. Bernard forces himself to dress as a janitor so he can get closer to the people at the meeting. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter because the examiner finds a serious problem with several loans. Bernard can't believe that the stupid loans got approved. Eventually, they find out that it belonged to Florence Jr. all along. It turns out that when Matt was in a hurry to run his bank, he skipped the rules and hired a lawyer that Florence recommended. By doing that, Florence was able to sneak in on the loans that were causing trouble. Sometime later, Bernard and Joe tell Matt that leaving the Bank of Marlin is the best move they can do. Matt doesn't want to lose his bank, so he does something without telling his partners. The next day, Joe finds out that he is moving, so he and Bernard run to Mainland Bank. They talk to Matt about the loans while Florence watches the drama. With a proud expression on his face, Matt is told by Bernard to get their books, but it's already too late. The federal bank examiners arrive to take away Mainland Bank's license to operate. The FBI stops Bernard and Joe as they leave the building. Bernard tries to stand his ground, but it's a pointless fight. Sometime later, Bernard and Joe meet with their lawyer. They find out that their case got involved in some racial politics in the country. In the meantime, Matt talks to Senator McClellan about giving evidence against his partners in exchange for his freedom. Matt thinks about what to do that night and makes a phone call. Matt takes McClellan's advice and testifies against his partners at the Senate hearing the next day. Later that same day, Bernard also meets with McClellan and listens to his plan. He gives him the choice of taking a deal that gives him immunity in exchange for confirming Matt's testimony or saying whatever he wants and going to jail. In the end, Bernard decides to say the words he has been thinking about for years. He talks about how people are treated differently because of their race. Shortly after that, both Bernard's and Joe's fortunes got wiped out. After the hearing, the two were also sentenced to federal prison. Florence Jr. buys the Mainland Bank for a small fraction of what Bernard and Joe paid. In the meantime, Matt Steiner was never accused of anything. Several years later, Bernard and Joe are let out of prison. Eunice finds it strange that the two men seem happy even though they've lost all their money. It turned out that wasn't true at all. Joe says that they own properties in the Bahamas that are right next to each other. Eunice is shocked and asks Bernard how that happened. It turned out that Matt had called Bernard the night before his testimony. He told Bernard about the senator's plan and apologized to him. In return, Bernard asked Matt for a favor before the government could seize their property. The movie ends when we learn that Bernard and Joe's homes were important in the fight against housing segregation in Los Angeles. They still have two mansions next to each other in the Bahamas. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.